Mr. Corey Peterson was a dedicated and committed serviceman, having served in the Air Force for a remarkable 20 years. Despite his unwavering loyalty to his country, his personal life was not as fulfilling. Unfortunately, his wife could not handle the constant absence that came with her husband's profession, and she chose to leave him a long time ago. During his time in active duty, Mr. Peterson was often deployed for long periods, sometimes as long as 6 months at a time. This extended absence put a significant strain on their relationship and ultimately led to the breakdown of their marriage. While Mr. Peterson was able to reconcile his sense of duty with the sacrifices he made at home, his wife was not willing to make the same compromise. Growing up in the South, she found it difficult to adjust to life in Alaska. Despite her best efforts, she just could not fall in love with the rugged and remote terrain, the harsh winters, and the isolation that came with living in such a remote location. Eventually, the stress and loneliness became too much for her to bear, and she fled back to the comfort of her parents in Miami, leaving Corey behind without so much as a goodbye note. When Corey found out what had happened, he was initially heartbroken but soon returned to his duties, deploying once again. Throughout the years, Corey continued to serve his country with distinction, working tirelessly until he finally retired. Upon reaching this milestone, Corey had time to reflect on his life and realized that he too was drawn to his roots, to the place where he was born and raised, to his village in Alaska. He felt a deep sense of belonging in the land of his ancestors, and he longed to return and rekindle his connection with the place that had shaped him into the person he was today. When Corey finally made it back to his native village, he took time to pay his respects to his late parents by visiting their graves. He also stopped by to see his younger sister, who lived in a nearby small town. Despite being blood relatives, Corey and his sister had grown distant over the years, with only a handful of postcards exchanged each year. Upon his arrival, Corey was met with a cool reception from his sister, who had become a self-sufficient woman with her own small house and had learned to live without relying on anyone else. Corey understood that his long absences had taken a toll on their relationship and that he had become a stranger to his own sister. After his visit with his sister, Corey decided to settle back in his native village and began searching for a job. He eventually found work as a forester, a job that suited him well, given his love for the outdoors and his strong work ethic. Being a retired Air Force officer, Corey brought a level of diligence and discipline to his work, skills he had honed during his time in the military. He approached each day with a sense of purpose, determined to do his best and make a positive impact on his community. The job of a forester was physically demanding, but Corey relished the challenge and was grateful to be working in a role that allowed him to spend time in nature and to give back to the land that had given him so much. He found a sense of peace and fulfillment in his work, and he was content to live a simple life in his village, surrounded by the people and places he loved. Despite being single, Corey was content in his solitude and did not feel lonely. He was, however, the object of attention for many of the local single women who were drawn to his charming military manners and rugged good looks. Despite the attention, Corey was not interested in starting a new relationship, at least not yet. He felt that he needed some time to himself, to reflect on his life, and to focus on his work as a forester. Luckily, Corey had a trusted assistant named Sean, a young man in his 30s who was always there to lend a hand. Sean was a hard worker, and he and Corey quickly formed a strong bond as they worked together in the forest. Corey appreciated Sean's dependability and easygoing nature, and he was grateful to have such a loyal and trustworthy colleague. The two of them spent much of their time working in the forest, enjoying each other's company and taking pride in the work they did. Through their shared experiences, Corey and Sean became friends, and Corey was grateful to have someone to confide in and to share his life with. Sean's life had not been easy, as he was widowed at a young age. 3 years prior, his wife Diana had passed away from leukemia, and the loss had taken a heavy toll on him. He withdrew from society, spending much of his time alone and visiting Diana's grave. Corey somehow was able to establish a connection with Sean, something that not many others had been able to do. It must have been his easygoing nature and genuine interest in others that helped him break down Sean's defenses and to gain his trust. Over time, the two men formed a strong bond, and Corey became one of the few people with whom Sean felt comfortable sharing his thoughts and feelings. The two loners who had once been isolated from the world now had each other, and they took comfort in the bond they had formed. As their friendship grew, Sean began to open up and become more involved. He was particularly interested in Corey's stories about his time in the Air Force, and he would listen intently as Corey shared tales of his experiences and adventures. The summer was particularly hot and dry, making conditions ideal for the outbreak of forest fires. Corey, as a forester, was on the front lines of the crisis, and he was quickly overwhelmed by the sheer scale of destruction that was taking place. The fires were spreading rapidly, and it seemed like no matter how hard firefighters worked, they could not keep up with the destruction. The fires were having a devastating impact on the local wildlife, with countless animals and birds perishing as the flames swept through the forests. Even rare species of cedar trees, which were treasured for their beauty and uniqueness, were reduced to ashes. The fires created a wall of destruction, engulfing everything in their path, leaving a trail of devastation in their wake. Corey was left feeling helpless and defeated as he watched the destruction unfold. "Sean, do you think we should call in a helicopter?" Corey turned to his friend, concern etched on his face. "What good will it do? Look at the destruction around us," the forester replied, his voice heavy with sadness. With the forest fires continuing to spread, there was only one hope: to wait for the rain to come and put out the flames. However, the timing of the rains was uncertain, and every day was filled with worry for Corey. As he walked the acres of land under his care, the smell of burning filled his nostrils, the acrid smoke clouded his vision, and the ominous crackle of the fire echoed in his ears. Despite his best efforts, there seemed to be nothing that Corey and his team could do to stop the force of nature from destroying everything in its path. One particular harrowing day, Corey set out on his rounds. As he approached the vast swamp that stretched for miles, he caught a glimpse of the powerful river that flowed at its far end, providing life to the entire region. Suddenly, Corey felt a gaze upon him and turned to find a massive wolf standing in the clearing of the forest. The beast's intelligent yellow eyes were fixed upon Corey, and he felt as though the wolf was silently pleading with him for help. The sight of the wolf, so powerful and yet vulnerable, filled Corey with a sense of awe and responsibility to protect the wildlife that called these forests home. "Hey there, buddy. Are you injured?" Corey noticed the wolf had returned, as if beckoning him to follow. He nodded in comprehension and followed the wolf. The beast led him to a clearing where Corey saw a pack of wolves that were cautiously observing him. The alpha female, her eyes irritated from the smoke, had her ears perked up in alertness. Two young wolves were nervously pacing nearby, whimpering, and three small pups were crying for their mother's milk. A raging wall of fire was closing in on the wolf family. Corey beckoned to the wolf and headed towards the swamps. As he leaned on his walking stick, he carefully made his way through the murky marsh. The pack followed him silently, not falling behind, but keeping a respectful distance. At the edge of the swamp was a small cabin. Corey opened the low door, which was propped up so that any sneaky wolverines couldn't get in. He grabbed some dried fish and meat from the lintel and tossed it to the wolves. Then, after collecting several buckets of water from a deep trap in the swamp, he poured it into a large barrel. "I got you guys some food and water. Make yourself at home here. It's a safe place," Corey said. The wolf cautiously gathered around the shack. The young ones eagerly devoured the meat, growling with satisfaction, while the mother kept a watchful eye on the man in the pea coat. After a while, Corey gently stepped away from the wolves. There was a feeling of peace in his heart. The forest fires continued to ravage the area for 3 long, difficult days. Then suddenly the sky was filled with violet and pink clouds, and a heavy rainfall began. The roads in the village turned into raging rivers, and the villagers cried with happiness. Corey and Sean finally felt a sense of relief and could breathe easily again. As the end of summer approached, Corey was at home on a chilly, rainy August evening when he heard a soft tap at his window. Assuming it was his friend Sean, he quickly made his way to the door, but to his surprise, he found his niece Mary standing outside. She was soaked to the bone. Corey invited her inside and told her to quickly change out of her wet clothes. He took out some warm socks and a sweater for her to put on. Mary, shivering from the cold, removed her wet jacket and revealed her large pregnant belly, the thin fabric of her dress clinging to her form. Whoa, hold up a minute. That's quite a bump you got there. Corey spoke gently, trying to comfort the upset young woman. It's okay. Don't cry, Mary, he said. I'll make us some coffee and we can chat. You can tell me what's got you so upset. After a bit, Mary started to calm down and relax. Uncle Corey, she said in a quiet voice, my mother threw me out of the house. It all started when Mary, the young niece, fell in love with a handsome and wealthy man. The man was skilled in the art of manipulation and used his words and gifts to win over Mary's heart. She couldn't resist the pressure and soon found herself pregnant. When she told her partner about the baby, he promised to marry her, but his parents were not on board with the idea. They didn't want Mary as their daughter-in-law. Joe, her partner, spoke to her in a guilty tone, saying, Don't worry, my love. My parents will come around eventually. For now, you can go home and give birth. We will get married soon after that, and my parents will have no choice but accept you and our child. Mary trusted Joe and went to her mother for help, but was met with rejection and shown the door. Mary's mother had warned her multiple times, but she wouldn't listen, and now she wasn't emotionally ready to accept her daughter. Mother just got remarried and she doesn't want anything to do with me or my baby. Mary began to weep once more. My stepfather didn't say much either in my defense. Corey, who was listening to Mary's story, felt a deep pain in his heart. He thought about how sad it was that the girl had been abandoned by her own family. He put his arm around her and whispered words of comfort, promising that he would always be there for her. The girl's sobs gradually subsided and she felt a little relieved. Corey went to the kitchen to make some hot tea and sandwiches, and they sat at the table, chatting and enjoying the warm atmosphere. Corey was outraged by Joe's parents' attitude and expressed his feelings. How could they be so heartless? I mean, you're carrying their grandchild. And your mother, I don't know what's going on in her head. Don't worry about them, keep going. When your baby's born, we'll raise it together. Mary started living in her uncle, Mr. Peterson's house. Time passed quickly, and before she knew it, a month had gone by and it was time for her to give birth. Mary was nervous, but it went much smoother than she had anticipated. The doctors and nurses in the maternity hospital were amazed at how effortlessly she delivered a strong and healthy baby boy. After a few days of rest and recuperation, Mary and her newborn son were ready to leave the hospital. A couple days later, Corey took them to the town. He was beaming with pride as he showed Mary the beautiful cradle for her baby. Now take a look at this, he said with a warm smile. Sean really outdid himself. This is a work of art. Now that's what I call a real man, not like the guy you've been hanging around with. He placed a comforting hand on Mary's shoulder, offering her a sense of security and love. As they drove back to the village, Mary received a text message on her phone. Quickly after reading it, she faced away and gazed out of the window, which caught Corey's attention. He became worried and studied his niece's appearance. She appeared to be pale, and her eyes, large and sunken in her thin face, seemed to be devoid of life. Corey asked with concern, Hey, sweetheart, what's wrong? Joe was getting married and he didn't even show up at the hospital when I was giving birth, even though he promised he wouldn't leave us. Mary wailed, her head sliding down the window as she broke into sobs. The baby in the back seat started to cry, but Mary didn't seem to be aware. Please calm down, my dear. Little Scotty's crying, Corey said soothingly. They arrived at home and Corey gently placed the baby in Mary's arms. Corey was filled with anger and rage as he drove back to the town. He had made a decision that he knew would haunt him, but he felt like he had to do it. He was determined to confront Joe and have a face-to-face conversation with him. He was eager to let Joe know how he felt about not showing up at the hospital and breaking his promise to never leave Mary and their family. Corey was determined to make sure Joe understood the consequences of his actions. As he drove, he thought about what he was going to say, rehearsing his words over and over in his mind. The thought of finally getting to say what was on his mind brought him a small sense of comfort. He found Joe's parents' large home. The sounds of loud music and the excited cries of the wedding guests could be heard behind the tall wrought iron fence. The guests were seated at a luxurious table adorned with beautiful wedding flowers. Corey thought about how he might resort to using his fists, but then he had a moment of clarity. He realized that if he got arrested, who would take care of Mary and the baby? This thought brought him a moment of pause as he tried to calm himself down. He didn't want to do anything that would harm the people he loved or land him in jail. Corey was able to enter the estate easily, and he stood directly in front of the bride and groom's fancy table. He approached Joe and whispered fiercely into his ear, "What about Mary and the baby, you bastard?" Corey was barely able to control his anger as he spoke. Joe remained silent, and his bride looked at Corey with a questioning gaze. "And you, young lady? You haven't hit the jackpot either. You should know that he's already betrayed once and he'll do it again," Corey shouted, his anger getting the better of him. At the commotion, someone called for the guards and they quickly rushed towards Corey. In a matter of moments, a group of strong men had overpowered Corey and forced him out. Frustrated and defeated, Corey returned to the village and was met by an anxious Sean. "Mr. Peterson, Mary's missing and so is the baby. I've gathered a group and we're searching the forest right now," Sean said, alarm in his voice. Corey's heart sank and he felt a terrible sense of foreboding. His heart was pounding loudly as he wondered what could have happened to Mary and their child. Desperate and without hope, Corey headed towards the swamp. Suddenly, a massive wolf appeared and blocked his path. Corey immediately recognized the wolf, and the wolf in turn recognized him. The wolf then turned and led the way, with Corey following closely behind. Eventually, the wolf brought Corey to a clearing where his family had taken refuge from a fire in the summer. There, Corey saw Mary sitting against a tree, holding the baby tightly in fear. Surrounding her were a mother wolf and 4 grown predators. Mary was neither alive nor dead, and Corey felt a mixture of fear and relief wash over him. He approached Mary carefully and gently placed his arm around her shoulders. "It's okay. Don't be afraid. These are good animals. They won't harm you," he reassured her. Mary told Corey about her intentions and how the wolves wouldn't let her go. "I was going to do something terrible. I wanted to end my life in the swamp, but these wolves surrounded me and wouldn't let me do it," she said. Corey thanked the wolves. "Thank you. Thank you for everything." The wolf looked at Corey, waved its tail, and disappeared into the thicket along with his family. Just like that, life in the village returned to normal. Mary fully recovered and was once again filled with joy and laughter, her happiness evident in her bright smile. Scotty grew into a mischievous child, always causing some kind of trouble. Corey loved spending time with his niece and grandson, bringing them gifts from the forest and watching them grow. The house was filled with happiness and the sound of laughter echoed throughout. Sean was a frequent visitor to Corey's house. As a woodworker, he always brought entertaining toys for Scotty. He had grown to love Mary and Scotty deeply. He helped around the house and spent a lot of time playing with the boy. He frequently chatted with Mary, and one day he came to Corey's house looking sharp and excited. He approached Mary and offered her a small ring. "Will you marry me? I will give my life for you and Scotty." Mary was overjoyed, covering her face with her hands and laughing and crying at the same time. "Yes," she replied. The entire village came together to celebrate the joyous occasion of the wedding. Even Mary's estranged mother, who had previously disowned her, came to the event and sought forgiveness. Mary, being the kind-hearted person she was, forgave her mother, and they hugged, with the little grandson looking on in wonder. It was a touching moment and one that brought the entire village together in celebration of love and forgiveness. Corey continued to work as a forester and enjoyed every moment of it. He roamed the forest for hours in search of his wolf friends, but never saw them again. They had moved to a more peaceful and serene place, where the rivers flowed strongly and the lands were filled with game. It was probably a better and more satisfying life for them away from the disturbed lands that were impacted by human activities. Corey was content knowing that his wolf friends had found